everybody, and welcome to another video. This video is intended to serve as a follow-up to the program on renaming a file that was created on 18 January, but for some reason we could not get it to work on the machine that we had at our college. So I'm going to take a look at the program once again and see if I can get it to work on my home PC or not. That is the one that I'm using at my home right now. So here you see this is the code that I had written on that day. So here is a class called rename1, and inside the class there is a public static void main method, and here is a boolean variable, and we've got two file objects over here. One of them points to the original file, that is program.txt. This is the file we are going to rename, and the second file object, that is f2, points to the name of the file that we wish to rename this first file to. So the thing is, this file f, this one should point to a valid file name, that is this file must exist at this particular path. So here you can see the path is djava, and this program.txt, this file should exist in this djava folder. So if this file doesn't exist in this djava folder, then the rename operation is not going to work. The problem that we were facing on that day was that even though the file did exist, we could not get it to work. That is, even though the file actually existed in our Java directory, it said that the file didn't exist and the rename consequently didn't succeed. So this is not the way it was supposed to work. We had created a file by the name of program.txt. Despite that, for some reason it could not detect the file and the rename operation did not work. Remember that before you can run this program, you will have to create a file called program.txt in your C Java directory. So here you can see that this is my C Java folder in my C drive, and here there is, as of now, there is no program.txt file. Okay, so right now if I run this code, it will say that the file doesn't exist, because here I am taking a condition that if the file does exist, by using this f.exists syntax, that is the f.exists command, I am checking whether the file f, this djava program.txt, whether it really exists in this path or not. Because if the file does not exist, then we cannot rename it. Alright, we cannot rename a non-existent file. If a file doesn't exist, then there is no way in hell that we can go ahead and rename a non-existent file. So first of all, we'll have to check whether the file exists or not, and if it does exist, we are going to rename this file, that is program.txt, to abc.txt. okay, so abc.txt, this is the name of the file that we wish to assign to our old file, that is program.txt. so this file f2, the name of the file f2 points to djava abc.txt, but it isn't necessary that this file abc.txt has to exist. It may not exist. Okay, and preferably it should not exist, because this program.txt is going to be renamed to abc.txt, and if there are two files by the same name in this folder, then it will create a conflict. So this file f, this pointer, this must point to an existing file, and f2, that is the file f2, is pointing to a file name that currently does not exist. But we are simply pointing to this file name so that we can assign this name abc.txt to our program.txt file. So if it exists, then we are going ahead with the rename operation, and this rename operation is returning a boolean type value that we are storing it in boolean variable b. So if the rename operation succeeds, it stores true value in the value true in b. Otherwise it just goes it will go to the else part, and it will say the file doesn't exist. And later on, at the end of the program, we are checking the value of b. So if the value of b, it may so happen that the file exists, but despite that the rename did not succeed for some reason. Maybe the file is write protected. So if the file exists, but despite that the rename operation did not succeed, then it will the value of b, it will retain its original value, that is false. And so at the end of the program, we will just check whether the value of b is true or not. If it is true, we will say that the rename operation was successful, and if the value of b becomes false, then we will say that the rename operation didn't succeed. So I've already copied and pasted this program in our Eclipse IDE, and as I told you that this is my C Java folder, and inside the C Java folder you can see that there is no file by the name of program.txt. So there are lots of files, but there is no program.txt file. So first I will go ahead and run the program and see what kind of output does it give. So obviously it says that the file doesn't exist and rename didn't succeed, because this f is pointing to program.txt, and before I can rename the file I am checking whether this exists or not, because like I told you before, because if a file doesn't exist we cannot rename it. So here this condition, if it is returning false, because the file actually doesn't exist in C Java folder. So as it returns a false value, it goes to the else part, and this condition isn't satisfied, so it goes to the else part and it outputs that the file doesn't exist. And the rename didn't succeed, that also is being printed because the value of boolean b is false, and as the rename operation didn't go ahead, so it didn't get an opportunity to change the value of b to true. So both of these error messages are being printed right now, and this was the problem that we were facing on 18th of January when we were trying to run the program on our college's machine. So the file actually did exist in our folder. We had created a file explicitly for this task. We had created a file called program.txt in our folder, but for some reason our program was unable to detect that file, and even though the file was there, it said that the file didn't exist and the rename didn't succeed. We were getting these error messages repeatedly, and no matter what troubleshooting techniques we tried, we could not get it to work. So there could be a multitude of reasons for that. Maybe there was some issue with the Windows operating system that we were using, or with the Eclipse IDE that we were using on that day. Sometimes the files may be write protected by Windows, or there may be some kind of restrictions on renaming or copying or modifying files, which could have prevented Eclipse IDE from going ahead and renaming them. So maybe for that reason, even though the file was there, we could not rename it. So what I'll do now, I'll create a file explicitly for this task. I'll create a new file called program.txt. Remember that the name of the file should be exactly the same as that of our, sorry, I ended up creating a folder. It should not be a folder, it should be a file. So the name of the file should be exactly the same as that of the name we have given in our program. So because Java is case sensitive, this really matters. So I am creating a new text document and I am renaming it to program.txt. So this program.txt is an empty file, it doesn't contain any data. So what I'll do now is I'll execute the program once again, and I'll check whether we could rename operation goes ahead as planned in the second attempt or not. So now if it goes ahead as planned, what will happen is that abc12, a file by the name of abc12 will be created. So we can see that there is already a file called abc12.txt. Let me delete it here. So if this operation goes ahead properly, so a new file called abc12.txt, okay, let me just change the file name, let me make it abc16. So a new file by the name of abc.16 will come to exist. So this original program.txt will be renamed to abc16.txt. So let us now give a second attempt and see whether it works or not. So here we have program.txt. So let us check. Unfortunately I cannot keep both the windows open at the same time because this will get minimized most likely. Yes, so let me run the program. So now it says rename successful. So let us check our outcome in the folder. So here you can see that there is a new file called abc16.txt, and the older file program.txt has does no longer exist. Okay, so we can now conclude that this rename program is okay. There is no problem with this particular program. Maybe there was some issue with the version of Windows that we were using on that day, or with the computer itself, or maybe with the Eclipse IDE like I told you before, and so our rename program was not working. But this code itself is accurate and free from any kind of bugs or glitches, because the program is running perfectly fine on my machine right now. If there was any issue with the code, it could not have worked on this instance either. So now we can conclude that this program is okay and there is no issue with it. So on this note, I am ending this video, and I'll see you in my next video. So please go ahead and try to run it on your own personal computer or laptop that you have at your disposal. And before you try to run this program, remember that you must create a file called program.txt in your C Java folder if it doesn't exist. If it doesn't already exist, you will have to go ahead and create a program.txt file in your Java directory under the C drive. Because if you do not have a file called program.txt, it will inevitably return a file not found error. Okay, and in that case this program will not work, and you will end up thinking that the code is not working even though the code is perfectly fine. And preferably do one thing when you are trying to run this Eclipse IDE. What you will do is, I'm giving you just a short tip. So where is my icon of Eclipse? So here is, you can see here is my Eclipse IDE as icon on the desktop. So what you can do is, if it doesn't work, you can simply just right click on it and select run as administrator, because sometimes some programs are not granted access to various files and folders or drives in our computer unless and until it has administrative access. So if you are the sole administrator or the sole user of your PC and you have access to your admin account, you can surely run it as an administrator. So what you can do is, if the file exists and everything is alright, and despite that you are not being able to get your this program to work and this rename operation is not going ahead, what you can do is you can simply right click on this Eclipse IDE icon and you can just select run as administrator. Then this Eclipse IDE will have admin privileges and it will be able to modify and rename files or manipulate files in your hard drive. So sometimes, especially this is especially true for this C drive, if you wish to manipulate or modify files in your C drive, it requires the program that is trying to modify or manipulate files that requires administrative privileges, and if you do not grant those administrative privileges, it will not work. In my case, I don't think I have run it in administrative mode. I am running it in normal mode, but despite that I am not facing any issues. So just give it a try. In case your program is not working in normal mode, just try running it in administrative mode. So this concludes our tutorial for now, and I'll see you all in my next video. Take care, guys.